For 150 years, the global economy has relied on a single assumption, that the oceans belong to everyone, and the narrow geographic corridors connecting them will always remain open. The 2026 closure of the Strait of Hormuz serves as the first test of that assumption, providing a baseline to see what happens when the model finally breaks. This is the reality of geographic leverage. By weaponizing a physical gap just 40 kilometers wide, a single actor can effectively hold 26.2% of the world's maritime oil trade hostage. The global supply chain is built on extreme connectivity, but as this localized maritime action proves, it possesses no structural redundancy. To understand the limits of this system, we are going to run a systemic stress test on the global maritime network. We will use the 2026 Hormuz closure as our primary data point for a catastrophic disruption. From there, we will simulate successive failures at the other primary nodes, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Strait of Malacca. Mapping these compounding network failures is essential for navigating a landscape where these gateways are now actively contested. Looking at the physical geography of the Persian Gulf, the constraint is immediate. Both the inbound and outbound shipping lanes traverse a narrow bottleneck between Omani and Iranian territorial waters. This represents 20.9 million barrels of oil per day exiting the Gulf, with 90% branching out toward East Asia. Tracing back, this single outlet is the exclusive maritime exit for 5 top producers: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, and Iran. Shutting down this volume did not require a traditional naval barricade. A handful of asymmetric drone strikes sent war risk insurance premiums so high that the market effectively priced the strait shut. To bypass the strait, Saudi Arabia and the UAE maintain overland pipelines. But their maximum combined capacity is roughly 4.7 million barrels per day. This leaves over 15 million barrels per day entirely stranded, with no way to reach the open sea. Hormuz represents absolute geographic leverage. The physical constraints mean system-level mitigation is mathematically impossible. To the west, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait serves as the gateway to the Red Sea. It is a 29-kilometer gap between Yemen and the Horn of Africa. A total blockade here would halt roughly 12% of global oil and gas and 30% of global container traffic. Without access to this corridor, ships on the Asia to Europe lanes must take a massive spatial reroute, navigating down the African coast and around the Cape of Good Hope. This detour adds up to 6,000 nautical miles and 20 days of transit time. The consequences cascade quickly: $7 to $9 billion in excess annual shipping costs, spot freight rates surging by up to 600%, and the total severance of critical LNG imports for the European market. Closing Bab el-Mandeb targets European energy vulnerability and global supply chain inflation, exploiting a route that has no viable land bypass. Finally, we move to Southeast Asia and the 900-kilometer Strait of Malacca. At its narrowest point near Singapore, the channel constricts to just 2.8 kilometers. This table proves Malacca's dominance. It handles 29.1% of the total maritime oil trade. In absolute terms, that is 23.2 million barrels of oil every day, making it the most heavily trafficked energy choke point on the planet. The weaponization of Hormuz has created a precedent for toll booth diplomacy. Bordering states like Indonesia have already explored levying transit fees on commercial ships, which would violate international rights to free transit. If Malacca closes, traffic must divert through the narrower Sunda or Lombok Straits, or navigate entirely around the Indonesian archipelago. The resulting delays and geographic bottlenecks would dismantle the calibrated just-in-time manufacturing networks of China, Japan, and South Korea. A closure at Malacca shifts the threat from energy shortages to a total industrial manufacturing shock across East Asia. Looking at the global network, we can see the impact of simultaneous failures at Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, and Malacca. The mathematics of disruption are compounding. Closing one passage absorbs the world's excess fleet capacity, making the next disruption exponentially more expensive. Major powers are already shifting their long-term strategies. China, for instance, has stockpiled 1.4 billion barrels of oil specifically to insulate itself against these vulnerabilities. This fragility is also driving the development of extreme alternatives. Russia and China are betting on the Arctic Northern Sea route to bypass Middle Eastern choke points entirely. Sovereign states no longer view the oceans as a shared commons. These waters are now strategic assets to be managed, monetized, or weaponized. Military escorts and naval patrols cannot solve these geographic realities or repair a fractured legal consensus. True resilience requires a structural demand reduction for the oil and gas that drive this entire system. It also requires nearshoring the manufacturing and critical mineral supply chains that currently rely on these vulnerable corridors. Finally, it means developing capital-intensive, multimodal trade arteries, like rail and overland pipelines, that do not rely on maritime straits. In a network of managed passages, global economic power no longer comes from defending geographic choke points, but from the structural ability to completely bypass